So I just wanted to take a minute, make a shorter video before I put out a kind of magnum opus video on Ivan Beck and the complex, of clearing up some theories that don't make 100% sense, and that doesn't mean they don't have any truth to them, but that means that they need some more workshopping, or they actually don't align with some of the details that we see in the series. The first one that I want to talk about is the idea that the complex in Overflow takes part of Ivan Beck's mind and then uses that to build itself out. And it sounds good on paper, right? Because Overflow is clearly telling us that this is kind of a big moment for the complex and our world becoming one and the same, but it doesn't make sense that it would be taking part of Ivan's mind and then building itself out, which it's become a very popular idea. And people have speculated maybe this was the wallpaper and the lights or something, or like some part of Ivan's childhood home. Maybe this is a place he's seen before, but it just doesn't make sense. The events of Overflow take place in 1972. We know from lighting and tile survey later down the line that the lights in the complex and the trough were made in 1973 and 1975. What that means is that Ivan couldn't have possibly remembered items that exist later than Overflow. That just doesn't make sense. Something other people have pointed out is that perhaps the complex and Ivan are entangled on some sort of maybe a quantum level, but if that were the case, then it wouldn't make sense that he would even know the brand of the lights. Why would he, if as a scientist, why would he know the brand of fluorescent lights? The brand is never visible because it's behind the diffusion layer. Moreover, how would he know the brand of the ballast and when the ballast was made? How would he be able to remember the entire sticker that's on the ballast? Lighting and tile survey really blew this theory apart because it just doesn't make sense when you consider the details found. I don't deny that the complex has some sort of deep intrinsic connection to Ivan Beck, and I promise I'm making a really long video about that. This just isn't it. It's not a literal entanglement between Ivan and the complex. Something else is going on here. I'm not entirely sure what yet, but that's not it. The next theory that I wanted to talk about is the Ivan Beck Flood Theory. We know Ivan was born in 1931 in Czechoslovakia, and at some point he immigrates to the United States. We know he arrived in the US at some point because in 1972 he's doing experiments in the United States. But how he got there, we're not entirely sure. He would have only been 40 at the time of Overflow, so he had to have immigrated sometime in between then. Kane has confirmed that he knew George Brem, the painter, who is featured prominently in Kane's albums, and so he must have immigrated to the United States before 1966. The poem from I Remember talks a lot about how a home was flooded and engulfed by the sea and taken and ripped away. Many have used that to speculate perhaps he was the victim of the Ohio River flooding in the 1930s, in specifically 1937. They then used the sticky note found in his office, which Kane posted in the Discord server briefly and then removed, that alludes to the fact that his house may have been on the Mississippi River. Red specifically came to the conclusion that it must have been Indiana, but I actually disagree here. There's a couple reasons why. One, Indiana is not on the Mississippi River in any capacity. There's an entire state between it and the Mississippi River. The only connection Indiana has to the Mississippi River is the Ohio River, which is a major tributary of the Mississippi River. It's possible he could have lived in Indiana if it were on the Ohio River, but then it wouldn't make sense why Kane would have included the Mississippi River detail. He had to live somewhere on the Mississippi River, right? And I'm not entirely certain right now. My best guess is Iowa, since we know that General Manufacturing, as we see from the lighting and tile survey, they're an Iowan company. They've been making products for Ford and GM since a long time ago, and they're based in Iowa. Could it be Iowa? Possibly, but like I said, I'm not entirely certain that the complex is actually using Ivan's memory. If Ivan were a victim of the Ohio River flooding, he would have had to have lived in that area around Mississippi, Iowa, Illinois, or Kentucky. One of those 4 states. I do agree that he has a strong connection to the Midwest, but it's definitely not Indiana. Now we're getting into some of the TikTok theories. Captain Clark is not the life form, guys. I don't know who was telling you that, but we know what the life forms look like, and they have one very signature look. They are tall, they are black, they are spindly, okay? They look like giant funguses. Captain Clark does not look like a giant fungus. Admittedly, there's some weird things about him, right? He has a skeleton. He has the capacity to bleed. We're missing something about still lives so far, but we do see at the end of the movie that they've x-rayed Captain Clark, and it turns out Captain Clark has a full skeleton, which is kind of crazy. Captain Clark is almost certainly a still life. Beyond that, we're not sure. sure. Could the other still lives have had skeletons? Certainly, but who the hell knows? We don't see the moment Clark was scanned, because if we're to take the film on its face as far as timelines go, and the camera incident happens around June 28th, 1990, the async researchers find Captain Clark on June 19th, 1990, which means that Captain Clark already existed nearly a week and a half before the camera incident with Kat and Bobby. The complex already knew either that this was going to happen, or it had already preconceived of Captain Clark as an idea. Something had already created Captain Clark. He was already there. Hell, even the TV was already like pre-conjured, as we see in Everything Must Go. So idea that Captain Clark came out of this one specific moment in a literal sense doesn't make sense. The complex is not pulling from people's memories. We know this because Kane said so, but even if it were, that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for how things from the future exist in our viewers' present, right? Take Found Footage 3, the flyer from 2022. That is a 2022 flyer existing in and around probably about 1996. Unsure on that one, but clearly the flyers from much more recent, and Ravi's experiences are from about 1996. So there are other time issues going on. There's people suggesting that the complex is pulling from China, but forgetting that the Bay Area actually has one of the largest Chinese populations in the nation. They've suggested that the complex is pulling things from China and putting them physically in the space around the United States in the complex. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. One, we know the flyer is from UC Berkeley in 2022, so the flyer is American, despite it being in Mandarin. This is just because there's just so many Chinese Americans living in and around the Bay Area. The other thing is that people point to the Mao poster from Found Footage 3, but the issue with the Mao poster is that, well, there's two issues. The poster itself reaffirms the themes of sun worship that we see throughout the complex, which I have no idea what the sun worship means. But two, it is not unreasonable to suggest that somebody in the Bay Area has a shrine of Mao up, especially in 95, because for a lot of Chinese people, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but after Mao died, China took a significant turn away from communist idealism and towards liberalization, capitalization. And so Deng Xiaoping is the person most associated with this in his reform and opening era. It's not unreasonable to suggest that somebody immigrated during that period and still had an affinity for Mao may have put a shrine up to him in the Bay Area. Even if that weren't the case, I mean, maybe there's just a poster of Mao on somebody's wall in the Bay Area for whatever reason. I don't know. It is not consistent to suggest that the poster was from China and then got transported to the Backrooms area under the Bay Area. We don't know where Found Footage 3 takes place, but based on the imagery we see in the complex, I believe that it does take place near the Bay Area. So those are all the theories that I just wanted to come on and debunk, mostly because debunking them for my bigger theory video is going to be important. Ivan Beck is the central character in this whole thing, the one who ties it all together, and I just don't know how. I just don't know how yet. I'm gonna figure it out, or at least come up with something that maybe you can use for your own stuff. But these are just a couple theories that don't make sense in the lore anymore.